that the Mishnah had said that if there was, today's Daf Yomi is Samach Aleph 61, and we're going to start on the bottom line of Samach on the base. That the Mishnah said that if you have a mitzuda chayav ofos v'dagim, yesh bahen gezel mishum darkei shalom. That if you have a trap that was a trap of a wild animal, bird, and a fish, it's going to be considered theft on account of darkei shalom. And Rabbi Yossi says it's actual gezel, it's actual theft. So the Gemara says the ozli v'ori, in a case where the fish were caught in nets or ori. These are, Rashi says, different type of nets which have a cavity to them. So since they have a cavity, we're going to say everybody agrees that since they have a cavity to them, then this man, the fisherman's utensils and the trapper's utensils have acquired the animal, and so therefore it's actual theft. We're on the top of 61a. Kipwigi belechi v'kukri, where it was a hook, or basically they put a long string and they put the needles across everything. So where they put a long string and they put the needles across it, and then it catches the animals. So then the fisherman and the trapper hasn't actually acquired it yet because he doesn't have a cavity, but he has caught them. So therefore, we're going to say it's not actual theft if you steal from the fisherman, but it's rabbinic theft. So, okay, we're on the top of 61a as we continue with today's Daf Yomi. So if a deaf mute or a minor or a person who's insane, none of these people have agency, if they find a lost object, then if you take it from them, it's theft on account of peace. And Rabbi Yossi says it's actual theft. Rabbi Yossi Omer Gezel Gamor. Amar Rav Chisda Gezel Gamor Midivrayim. So he says, Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Chisda says that even Rabbi Yossi is not saying it's biblical theft. He's saying it's rabbinic theft. He says Gezel Gamor Midivrayim. It's rabbinic theft. So the Gemara says L'maynaf Kamina. Well, if Rabbi Yossi is saying it's rabbinic theft, then what's the difference between Rabbi Yossi and the rabbis? They're both saying it's rabbinic theft. So the Gemara says, L'hotzio b'dayanin. Whether the difference between them is whether or not you're able to be motzio, if you're allowed to take it out with judges. That according to the rabbis, you can't take it out as a result of judges. You can't go to court and get the money back from the judges for this child who was stolen from. Whereas according to Rabbi Yossi, it's actual theft. Of course, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's not actual theft to take it away from that, meaning to say to disqualify him as a witness or to violate a prohibition, but yet you still could go to the court and take it away, and the judges could take away from the person who stole from the minor. Then we say ani amenaki barosh azayis, that if there's a poor man who's banging down the olives from the top of the tree, then if you steal it, it's theft. So Tana imlikate vinasam biyad hareze gazel gamor. Let's say he collected it with the hand on the ground, and then so the situation here is that if the poor man gathered the olives from the tree and he put them in his hand, and only after them did they fall to the ground, meaning he was climbing the tree and he collects them in his hand and then throws them to the ground, and then this other person came and took them, well, that's actual theft, because once the poor man has collected with his hand, it's actual theft. So now the Gemara tells a story about this. Rav Kahana Rav Kahana was walking to Hutzal. We're on 61a. There's 61a. Kahana was walking to Hutzal, and so he saw that there was a man there that was throwing sticks, and he was knocking the dates down to the ground. So then he went. Rav Kahana basically sees this guy throwing the sticks at the tree, at the date tree, at the palm tree. The dates are very high, and he throws the sticks there, and the dates fall down, and Rav Kahana picks up the dates and starts eating them. So the man says to him, he says, why are you why are you taking these dates? Don't you see that I'm throwing them down with my hands? Meaning to say, I didn't just knock them down with the sticks. I threw them down with my hands. So, and so therefore, you really don't have the right to take them. So he basically accuses Rav Kahana of stealing from him. So Rav Kahana says, I'm going to Asra to Rav Yoshaya. So he says, oh, you're a guy, you know what you're talking about because you come from Rav Yoshaya's place. Kari away, Bitzadik Yisodolam. Let's talk about Rav Yoshaya. He's called the foundation of the world. So therefore, he says, so Rav Kahana, rather than reacting and saying, well, you know, it's mine, he praises the rabbi who taught this person the halacha. Well, he didn't apologize. So he says that what was going on here. So what was the explanation here? The explanation here, so Rashi says that this person was trying to knock down the dates via the stick. So Tosfos says if that's the case, why was Rav Kahana eating from those fruits? Because even though this person didn't take them in his hand, don't we learn in the Mishnah that it's Gezam and made Darkei Shalom, so it's not allowed to do that. So why was he doing it? How come Rav Kahana wasn't worried about that? So Tosfos says that means that he was knocking down the branches from the tree, and that person was cutting them and throwing down those branches, but the dates were remaining on the tree. So Rav Kahana's understanding was that the person doesn't really intend to acquire all of the dates. He's just cutting down the branches, and so therefore he thought that he could take them. That's what Tosfos says. The Ramban, and so about this, the person responded that not only does he intend to acquire them, but rather he also picked them up with his hand. So it's actual theft, and it's Gezel Gomor. So that's what Tosfos says. The Ramban and the Rashba write that Rav Kahana thought that this person was not Jewish, and so therefore he said, I don't have to have the stringency of not stealing for the sake of peace in this case, because it's not actual theft. The Shitas Kadmonim explains a different explanation, that the Takana of Chazal was that somebody who collects on the top of the tree gets to acquire those fruits that fell down. But that's only by a case where that's only in a case where he's gathering up the gifts of the poor and the leket shecha and peah. But if it was an ownerless tree, the takana doesn't apply. And so therefore, Rav Kahana was saying this was an ownerless tree. Why does Rav Kahana say about him this verse, Tzadik Yisod Olam? Because we know that the world rests upon din, emes, and shalom. It rests upon truth, peace, and justice. And so din, emes, v'shalom. So therefore, since the mishpat is, according to the mishpat, it's permitted for everybody to take these fruits that fell down because he didn't acquire them. So therefore, but there wouldn't be peace if he would do that. So therefore, on account of the peace, they established a takana that you can't take them. But that's not mishpat. But Rabbi Yoshaya taught the people of the city to first collect the fruits with their hands, and so therefore they've acquired them. So it's both mishpat and shalom. So be able to fulfill the concept of both mishpat and shalom, which is the highest level, justice and peace. That's why Rabbi Yoshaya taught them. That's why he said about him the pasuk of Tzadik Yisod Olam. Okay, so the concept of Tzadik Yisod Olam is a very big theme in Rebbe Elimelech's Noam Elimelech. So that's why it's very dear that a tzaddik has the ability to be the foundation of the world, to affect the entire city in which he lives in. Well, not only the city, but also the entire country, the entire world. So now we say, he says, we do not stop the poor non-Jews from collecting from collecting the gleanings and the forgotten fields, forgotten corners of the field that made Darkei Shalom, in order to so that there be peace in the land. Hold on 1 second. So then they said as follows. Tana Rabbanim, Mefarnas Timaniye Nachrim Maniye Israel, Mevakrim Koi Nachrim and Koi Israel. We give money to the poor Nachrim, to the poor non-Jews, along with the poor Jews, and we visit the sick non-Jews with the sick Jews, and the Kover and Mesi Nachrim and Mesi Israel and Dar Kisham. We bury the dead, the non-Jewish dead with the non-Jewish Jews, with the Jewish Jews, on account of peace. Rashi says it doesn't mean we actually bury the non-Jewish people with the Jewish people because we have separate cemeteries, but rather it means that we get involved to make sure they're buried properly if you found them that they're in need of a burial. So that's what Rashi says. Okay, now up to the next Mishnah. Mashelas isha lechaverta achashud ala shvius nafek v'rechayim v'tanor. So the circumstance here we're talking about is that there is a woman. There are two women. One of them is a nice religious Jew, and the other one is not observing all the commandments. And specifically, she's not observing the commandment of the sabbatical year, that she's required that at a certain point that she's not allowed to keep the fruits of the sabbatical year. So this woman is suspected that after the time where after the time where the fruits were supposed to be taken out of your house, the fruits of the sabbatical year, she still keeps them in her house. That's a violation of the laws of Shvius. And now she wants to borrow your sifter, your filter, your nafa, your kavrayim, and your grinder, and your oven to cook and eat these foods. So you're allowed to lend them to her. You're allowed to lend her these foods, even though by doing it, there's a good chance she's going to do a sin. But you're not allowed to. You could give her your utensils so she can prepare the food herself. You don't have to be worried that you're helping this woman sin, but you're not allowed to grind it with her and sift it with her. You're not allowed to actually help her because you're not allowed. The concept is you're not allowed to actually help them with your hands during the time of the actual sin. That's what you're not allowed to do. Eishes chaver. So let's say you have the wife of a chaver. The chaver is somebody who's very careful about the laws of tithing. Ma'ashelas eishes amaretz. He's allowed to lend to the wife of a woman. She's allowed to lend to the wife of a woman, to the wife of an amaretz. Amaretz is somebody who's not careful about the tithing. Not of a kivra. She's allowed to lend her a filter and a grinder. Uboreres v'tochenes umerakedes ima. And she's allowed to grind and sift out the foods with her, because at that point the Gemara is going to say, why are you able to do this? Isn't she suspected about tithes? And the Gemara is going to explain why it's okay. But once the water touches the grains, then we're going to say at that point, once the water touches the grains, then you're not allowed to touch it with her, because you're not allowed to help somebody commit a sin. So what's the reason? Once the water touches the grains, you're not allowed to touch it, because so once the water is touching it, so then at that point, it's basically you're using it for dough, and once it becomes dough, then it becomes tevel in the sense that you need to give challah. You need to take a portion of it, give it to the kohen. And so therefore, since you're helping her to evade the halacha of giving it to the kohen, and also since it becomes water on it, therefore it becomes tameh, because once water is on it, then the dough is able to become tameh, and so the utensils of the amaretz make it tameh, and therefore you're helping her to knead the dough, and you're causing the challah to become tameh. Also, ligram tumah l'challah. You're not allowed to make the challah become tameh. So, and then when you're v'kulan, we continue in the Mishnah. V'kulan lo amrel nedar kishon. The reason for all these things, that why do they allow you to lend these utensils and to help them when it's not the time of the sin itself? Only in order to create a situation of peace. And you're allowed to help the Nachrim themselves, non-Jews themselves, during the sabbatical year. The Gemara is going to ask, how can you do that? The Gemara is going to explain. Below Israel, but you're not allowed to help a Jew who's violating this sabbatical year. Vishol and Bishlomam, Minei Darkei Shalom. And all the days of the year, you're allowed to ask how the non-Jew is doing. You're allowed to ask about Shalom b'Shalom on account of peace. What's the problem there? Rashi says the potential problem could have been because you're placing on the non-Jew the name of heaven, because you say Shalom, and Shalom is the name of God. So basically, you could be like associating it with idolatry. So the Shalom b'Shalom made Darkei Shalom. That's how Rashi explains it. So that's how Rashi explains it. So now we continue with the Gemara. The Gemara says, Ma'ishna Reishan u'Ma'ishna Seifan. How come in the Reisha, in the first clause where it has to do with the sabbatical year, there we say that you're not allowed to work with her and sift out the food directly with this woman who's suspected about the sabbatical year? And why in the Seifa, where we say you can grind the grain with her, even though you're actually helping her, because she's not tithing this produce? So the Gemara says, so Bai says most of the Amei Haaretz tithe their produce. And so therefore, it's just a rabbinic concern that she's not tithing it. And so therefore, on account of Darkei Shalom, we're allowed to help her. But she is suspected about the sabbatical year, but therefore we're more concerned that she's really going to be in violation of the sabbatical year, so therefore you can't actually help her directly. That's the answer that Abaye gives. Rava says, no, here, what's the reason why you're able to help her with the grains, even though it's not tithed yet? What's the reason that you're allowed to grind the grains with the Amei Haaretz? So Rava gives a different answer. It's not that most of the Amei Haaretz are not suspected about tithing, but he says, Hachab Amei Haaretz to Rabbi Meir. We're talking about a specific type of Amei Haaretz, and this is an Amei Haaretz who is of Rabbi Meir. And what's this Amei Haaretz of Rabbi Meir? This is a type of Amei Haaretz who really does separate the tithes, but he's just careful. He's not careful to eat them in a state of ritual purity. And so therefore, the Tumah Tahara and the Tumah and Tahara that we're talking about, that's talking about Midrabanan. That's talking about the Tumah and Tahara that's only rabbinic, meaning to say that these are fruits or food that are not really biblically truma, and so therefore it's just rabbinic, and so therefore the rabbis allowed you to help them on account of Darkei Shalom. So the Gemara says, the Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Ezu Amei Haaretz. What's an Amei Haaretz? According to Rabbi Meir, an Amei Haaretz is somebody who does not eat their food, their regular food, not their sacred food, not their tithes, but they're just chulin, the regular food in a state of ritual purity. That's the extra hider that the Chaverim took upon themselves, that even the regular food they would eat in a state of ritual purity. The Chachamim says, no. What's an Amei Haaretz? Somebody who doesn't tithe their fruits. Gemara says, well, so therefore, this is talking about the Amei Haaretz of Rabbi Meir, who's not really in violation of it. It's just a rabbinic concept, and so therefore you're allowed to help them for the sake of peace. The Gemara says it can't be. But what about the concluding clause of the Mishnah, which says, from once the water goes onto the dough, you're not allowed to touch the food with her. You're not allowed to touch the grain with her because it will become tamei. Because the Reisha doesn't disprove that the first clause is not a reference to Tumah and Tahara, because if it was a reference to Tumah and Tahara, then we would have said that even in the first clause it would have been a problem. So the Gemara says, Reisha v'Seifa b'Tumah v'Tahara. Both the first clause and the second clause are talking about Tumah and Tahara. Reisha b'Tumah Schulin, v'Seifa b'Tumah Chal. So the Gemara says both the Reisha and the Seifa, the first clause and the second clause, are referring to Tuma and Tahara. The Reisha is talking about Tumas Chulin, and so therefore, since it's just talking about the woman making the Chulin Tameh, the regular food Tameh, and so therefore it would have been something that you should be prohibited. However, because of Darkei Shalom, because just a rabbinic prohibition, we're going to allow you to work with her as long as you don't make the fruits disqualified. Whereas the Sefer, the second clause is Tumas Chala, that meaning that now it is becoming obligated in Chala, and so therefore, when the woman makes it Tameh, that's a biblical prohibition of making the Chala Tameh, and so therefore we're not going to allow it. Gemara says, are you really saying that you're allowed to help this woman who's make the chulin, even though you're making it tamei, that there's no problem? But don't we learn about this? We have the brisa that the brisa states. We have the brisa states on top of 61b. Tochanin umafkidin etzel ochle shvius, that we are going to grind, we're allowed to grind the grain and deposit it with people who eat the sabbatical, with people who are in violation of people who eat the fruit of the sabbatical year. Ve'etzel ochle peroseim b'tumah, and you're also allowed to leave it with people who eat their fruits in a state of ritual impurity. Avolola ochle shvius. So meaning to say, we can grind the fruits we can grind the grains of food that was already separated, the Truma and Ma'asros, and we can then leave them with the people who eat sabbatical fruits in the prohibition. And we're also allowed to leave it with people who eat their fruits in a state of ritual impurity. And we don't have to be concerned that we're just storing it with them. We don't have to be concerned that they're going to switch those fruits with the other fruits. But we're not allowed to grind it for people who eat the fruits in the state of ritual purity, because then you're helping them to do a sin. So we see from this price so that you're not allowed to help somebody who eats the chulin in the state of tumah. So why does Rava say it's okay? So Amar Abai says, Hasam, there are the circumstances, but kohen echoshe lechol truma, but tumah askinon. So Abai says the reason why there the price is prohibited to grind it for that person is because we're talking about a kohen who is suspected of eating truma and in a state of ritual impurity, and that's the state of tumah d'oraisa. So Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if that's the case, how can you deposit it with the kohen if you're suspecting him of eating the truma d'oraisa? Gemara says, that it says you're allowed to leave the truma with the Yisrael as an Am Haaretz. So truma is not allowed to be eaten by a non-Kohen. So if the non-Kohen is an Am Haaretz, you could leave it with him because you don't think he's going to touch the Kohen's truma, because the Kohen's truma, he stays away from it. But if the Kohen himself is the Am Haaretz, you can't leave the truma with him because his libo is gaspa, because he himself might come to eat it. And so therefore, because he's so accustomed to eating the truma, so you can't do it. But anyway, we see from here that you're not allowed to deposit the fruits with the kohen who's suspected of eating the truma that's tmeah. So the Gemara says, no, you're depositing the fruits in the utensil which is covered up, and so therefore you can't touch them. So the Gemara says, but we still have to be concerned. Why aren't we concerned that his wife, who's menstruating, and therefore she can make it tummy even though it's in a utensil just by moving it? So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, so Gemara says, so let's go back to the answer that we gave that says that we're talking about a klicheres. So the Gemara says, Lokasha, if there were fruits that were capable of becoming tamei because they had water already poured on them, then we're going to say under those circumstances, that's where you can't deposit it. But when you're allowed to deposit it is where the fruits were not yet capable of becoming tamei. The Gemara says, but we have a question about this. Raminhu, amoech chitin, l'tochen kusi or tochen amaretz. Let's say you're bringing wheat to a grinder who's a kuti or is an amaretz. Meaning to say, these retain their same status with respect to tithe and the sabbatical year. Meaning to say, we don't have to be concerned that the kuti took these fruits and switched them with fruits that are from the sabbatical year or ma'aser, but of a lower tumah. But we do have to be concerned that may be made in tamei. So we see from here that you have to be concerned that he touched the fruits and made it tamei. So how can we say in the brisa that you could deposit it with somebody who suspected about the sabbatical year. So the Gemara says, "Hi, my Rumia. What kind of question is this? Didn't we already say we're talking about fruits that are not capable of becoming tamei, and so therefore he can't make them tamei. The karle, my karle. So what was the question? So the Gemara says, Mishum the kabaylo mirme achrisewa, because he wants to ask the next question, because the next part of the Brisa says, they retain their status for Meiser and Shvius. The Gemara says, don't we have to be concerned that they switched them with respect to Meiser and Shvius? Didn't we learn? We have the following case. I know saying lechamot. So somebody gives if you have a chaver and he's believed about tithing, and you believe that he's very careful about tithing, and he gives grain to his mother-in-law to make dough, and she is the wife of an Amar, so she's not careful about tithing. So Meiser et Shehu noten la, ve'et Shehu notelim on it. Whatever he gives to her, he has to take a tithe from it, and whatever she gives back to him, he has to take a tithe from it again. Because we have to be concerned that she's going to switch it out and give him a dough that's better than what he gave her. And so therefore he has to tithe what he gives her, because maybe she's going to switch it out. And also he has to tithe what he got back, because maybe she switched it out. So we see from here, when you give it to the mother-in-law, you always have to tithe it. But why in this case do we say that you can deposit it with a person who's an Amaretz? So why by a mother-in-law do you have to tithe it? So the Gemara says, Hasan to the Gittin time. There the Gemara gave a specific reason why we have to suspect the mother-in-law of switching it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda rotzi b'takonas pita ubusha mechasana. The mother-in-law is going to want that she's going to give her daughter better bread, and so therefore she's going to switch it out. But at the same time, she's embarrassed from her son-in-law to give him bread that's not good, and so therefore she's going to switch it out, and it's not going to make it worse. And so therefore, specifically, the mother-in-law is suspected that she's going to take out the bread and give him better bread. By other people, we don't have to have this concern that he's going to give him better bread, and so therefore they're not concerned about that. The Gemara said, because he maybe she doesn't switch it. If she doesn't switch it, then he has to take this bread, and he's only going to eat it if it was tied. But if he tithed it when he received it, you mean when he got it back from her? Well, maybe she'll serve it to other people and say it was his bread. So right. So I see what you're saying, that they could just tithe it when he gets back from her. But I guess the point was you're not supposed to give people bread that's not tithe. So the Gemara says, is, and in general, are you not concerned? Vatanan. You're not concerned that people are going to switch it. Vatanan. I know Pundakis, that's his host, like in his Airbnb as a host. My Sarah Chuno saying love at Chuno telling him he has to tithe what he gives to her that she makes into bread for him, and when he takes back from her. Nor says there it's the same idea. Hasan Muria, she's going to make a ruling for herself. Amra Barbe Rav Lecho Chamima Bani Echol Kaveri. She says, I'm going to give my distinguished guest the better bread, and I'll eat the worse bread. And so therefore we could. That's another reason. The Gemara gives another attempt to prove this. Gemara says, "Vakati Amalo Chashin and Vatanya." But didn't we learn Eishes Chaver Tochemes and Eishes Amaart Bisman Shi Tameya? But then we learn in the Brisa that the wife of a Chaver could grind the grain with the wife of Amaart when, even though she's ritually impure, because since she's Tameya, she's not going to be. We're not concerned she's going to touch the Toros, and so therefore we're not concerned that maybe she's going to eat. The wife of the chaver can do it when she's tamei, because we're not concerned she's going to eat it then. Aval lo bizman shehi tahora. So, but she can't do it when she's tahora, because maybe she's going to eat these foods and they're not tithed yet. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, "Afis man shehi tamei lo titkon meisha chaverta no senas lavo chalas." Even when she is Tamea, she can't grind it because we're concerned that maybe she'll give it to her on herself and she's going to eat. So the Gemara says, "Hashta mignav ganva chilufe lo mechafa." So are you, if you're concerned that the wife of the Amaretz is concerned that we're suspecting her that she's going to steal and give it to her friend, so for sure she might come to switch it out. Amar Yosef Hasanami Moria va'amri Torah midishek. No, the wife of the Amaretz is going to say, "Listen, it's mine because I'm working on it, so I have the right to take it and give it to you." Therefore, she's going to say it's permitted. All right, we'll stop here with recording, and we'll stop here and pick it up later today. Yashikoach.